Hello everyone and welcome to another Stargate lore video. Today we're going to be talking about the Gadmeer.
Not exactly E.T.
History. The Gadmeer were a race that, according to the show, existed for at least 10,000 years, though they may have been older than that, but we'll get to that when we get to that. As a race, we know they were advanced in things such as medicine, science, mathematics, philosophy, and art. Unfortunately, they were peaceful and didn't really invest much in the military, and were completely destroyed by superior military power. Now, it's never said who did this, but come on. An advanced, peaceful civilization was completely wiped out in the Milky Way galaxy. Not a lot of other options besides the Goa'uld. In fact, in the new Stargate SG-1 role-playing game RPG rulebook, they just flat out state it was the Goa'uld. Also, this is the first time I can actually use lore from that rulebook, so that's neat. Getting back to the Gadmeer, before the destruction of their race, they built an ark of sorts, carrying DNA samples from their homeworld. The vessel would be able to terraform a planet and rebirth their race and civilization on a world far away from their enemies. We don't know how long the vessel spent looking, but based on a comment made by Lotan about how long it had been since someone had listened to Gadmeer music, it may have been around 1,000 years. During that time it scanned millions of worlds, but none of them matched the 2,634 parameters needed to terraform a world. That wasn't until the ship found the world P5S-381. This would also be when the ship first made contact with Stargate Command, but there was a tiny, itty-bitty problem. One of the parameters for a world to be terraformed was they had to have no intelligent life on it. When the ship found the world, it was uninhabited and began the terraforming process. But when Stargate Command found the world, they found it a perfect place for a race known as the Incarans. They will have their own lore episode in the future, but the basics are that some members of their race were taken away from their homeworld and enslaved by the Goa'uld. And just to kind of clear this up, no, they're not human. I know they look exactly human except for their eyes, but from what I can tell, they evolved on their homeworld separately from humanity. One of the differences between humans and Incarans is that Incarans are extremely sensitive to radiation and need a dense ozone layer on a planet to survive. Ironically, many of the same conditions for P5S-381 that make it ideal for the Incarans also make it ideal for the terraforming process. Over the course of 2 weeks, Stargate Command began the process of bringing thousands of Incarans to P5S-381. Although something we do learn is that Stargate Command only had a short time to analyze the planet before they moved the Incarans there. Unfortunately, the new environment being created by the ship was not suitable to carbon life, as the Gadmeer are sulfur-based, and any carbon-based life would be killed if they stayed on the planet. Compounding this was the fact the ship only had enough raw material to transform one planet, and since the process had started on this world, it had to be finished. Another compounding factor to this was the fact that Stargate Command would never be able to get all the Incarans off-world before the Stargate was overtaken by the terraforming effort. The ship was automated, so when it discovered the Incarans, it created a robot named Lotan in the form of the Incarans to explain the situation, which was basically,
Tough luck. Get out.
the Incarans decided to stay rather than leave their new homeworld or anyone behind. Stargate Command was unwilling to send military aid to deal with the situation, so SG-1 was on their own. Daniel hoped he could convince Lotan to consider other possibilities, and Jack tried to use a Nakoda generator as a bomb to destroy the ship. In the end, Daniel was able to convince Lotan to stop the terraforming process by pointing out the Gadmeer had laws, justice, and respect for life, and wouldn't want their world built upon an act of mass murder. The terraforming process was stopped and the bomb was shot into the sky. But this still left them at an impasse because the process would have to continue on this planet. During their talk, Daniel got the idea to go through the ship's logs on all the worlds it had scanned, to see if any of them had conditions that would suit the Incarans. When they did this, they found the ship had actually found the original Incaran homeworld. As such, the Incarans were offered a deal: give up their claim to the planet, and the terraforming ship would take them to their original homeworld. Afterward, the ship would return and continue the terraforming effort. In the RPG book, we learned the ship did successfully drop the Incarans off on their homeworld, but that's a story for another time. We also know the Tari were gifted a historical archive for helping to resolve the issue, which, fun fact, Daniel actually asked for something like this when he learned about the Gadmeer, so props to the writers for adding this in the book. The archive contains history of the Gadmeer up until destruction by the Goa'uld. It does add what one might call a retcon by stating that the Gadmeer civilization was 500,000 years old, when previously we were told it was 10,000 years old. I say this is kind of a retcon because they specifically state this was for the ancient Gadmeer civilization. So it's possible the first number we heard, 10,000 years, was for the modern Gadmeer civilization, but the Gadmeer as a species are much older than that. A good example would be if an alien race came to Earth and met with the United States government and gave them the historical archive of all of humanity. America might only be around 200 years old, but humans as a species and our various civilizations go back much farther than that. Unfortunately, while the archive contains historical and cultural items, such as their music, it contains almost nothing about their technology. Currently, people are looking through the archive to try and find location for lost Gadmeer colonies to find any leftover tech, which is interesting. I think the implication here is that these colonies were also destroyed, but this could lead to a further story where maybe a group of Gadmeer survived and, I don't know, become isolationist and xenophobic and hostile to any species that come their way. I don't know, it's just an interesting idea. This has been the last we have ever heard from them, and given we don't know how long it would take for the new Gadmeer civilization to rise after the terraforming process, or how long the terraforming process itself might take, it could be a long time before we see them again. Biology. The chief thing about Gadmeer biology is that they are sulfur-based and cannot survive in carbon-based environments. Besides that, there's really not much to say about them biologically, as we don't really get the best of looks at them. They've been described as being a mix between a lizard and an insect, bipedal with a long tail, the face having some kind of hummingbird-like protrusion coming out of it, large eyes, and some kind of tether that connects the head to the back. Personally, I think they look like a mix between a Protoss and a Xenomorph, but that could just be me. Just some other notes I have here, we learned that the alien microbes being distributed by the terraformer were also affected by UV radiation, meaning the Gadmeer could be affected by UV radiation like the Incarans are, hence the reason they need a dense ozone layer on the terraformed world. We also know that their ears are built differently compared to humans and Incarans. That would make it impossible for us to understand their music. But not me, I totally get it.
That's what I call music.
Society. We sadly don't really know much about Gadmeer society. We know that they were peaceful and had things such as medicine, science, mathematics, philosophy, laws, and art. And of course their music. We also know they had some respect for life, and that was the chief thing that made Lotan stop the ship. The only other thing I can think to add is this weird comment said by Lotan. O'Neill wanted to talk to his boss, and Lotan says,
"Assumption of hierarchical command structure. Interesting."
But I don't really know what this means. Like, I guess this means the Gadmeer don't have a hierarchical society, but I don't really know, since that kind of weird look he gives could mean like, oh, they have like a society like ours, or he's just interested in learning about other societies. I don't know. I don't know what this means. Technology. Technologically, the Gadmeer were advanced. Their greatest and really only piece of technology we see from them is their massive spaceship terraformer. We know it is 2 miles in diameter and was able to have an energy current of over 20 miles for the terraforming effort. The ship is able to travel through the stars, though we don't know what its FTL capabilities are. Although I have to imagine they're pretty fast if they're able to go to a completely other planet, drop people off, and then come back to do the terraforming effort. The ship can hold the DNA samples of an entire world, including all the plants, animals, and people of the world. We also see they had teleportation technology, which seemed to be pretty advanced, almost on par with the Asgards. They also seem to have a good understanding of robotics, as the ship was able to make Lotan one day after encountering and scanning the Incarans. Lotan is interesting because he describes himself as a biomechanical representation, and fandom claims he's a clone, but in the episode, O'Neill refers to him as a robot. Given that he describes himself as biomechanical, I'd most likely assume he's some kind of mix between the two. Regardless of what exactly he is, robot, clone, or something in the middle, he is very clearly advanced, or at least requires advanced technology to make. One last thing to say about them technologically is I'd assume they don't have a lot of advanced weaponry. Not because they couldn't make them, but mostly because they didn't want to. I do wonder if a reborn Gadmeer race would kind of learn the lessons of their forebears and invest in military technology, but specifically for the purpose of defending themselves. Relations with other races. Now for relations, the Gadmeer have it a little hard since you know, they're technically extinct. If they were brought back, I'd imagine they have some pretty bad relations with any Goa'uld still alive, as they exterminated the Gadmeer. Although I do wonder how they would interact with the Tok'ra, if they would have the same hostilities. As for other races, I'd imagine that any reborn Gadmeer race would have good relations with the Tari and the Inkarans they brought back to their homeworld. Since the old Gadmeer race was peaceful, I'd assume the new ones would also become peaceful as well, and would most likely have good relations with other races. And that was the Gadmeer, and
I got nothing.
they're not a bad race, and their design isn't too bad. At the same time I say that, I also feel like it was made super alien just for the sake of making something super alien, that there'd be kind of this weird like clash between the two because both races couldn't exist on the same planet. Again, they're not a bad race, I just don't really have like any interesting insights about them like I do with the Lingarans or say the Tolan. But yeah, that was the Gadmeer. What do you all think about the Gadmeer? Do you have something you can actually say about them? And are they one of your favorites in the Stargate? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below and maybe leave a like and subscribe. And remember,
This music has not been written for 1,000 years.
The Stargate lay till we broke the code. How it takes us
Nice.
to you
Sounds very unpleasant.
on our mission to get
Really?
back.